What should I do? I don't know what to do. You probably must have heard these expressions many times. Well, people usually use these phrases to ask for advice. And this is what we are going to talk about today. So, what is advice? Advice is simply when you tell someone what to do and how to act in a certain situation. For example, when people have problems, they usually turn to friends or family to ask for help, and that's when they get advice. Let's take a look at this picture. Right, so as you can see, we have a guy who's really exhausted. He's been working all day long and he hasn't finished work yet. What's your advice for him? Right, you should get some rest. Obviously, he's in dire need of some rest. This is the best thing he can do. So you can say, you should get some rest or stay rested. So we can use the expression you should, which is one of the most common expressions used in the English language for advice, or simply the verb in the imperative, stay rested, as simple as that. Now, let's take a look at how people ask for advice. So here's the first expression on the list. What do you advise me to do? Pay attention, we've got the verb advise written with an S, unlike the noun, which is written with a C, and it's pronounced advise. What do you advise me to do? Or, what should I do? What can I do? Or, I don't know what to do. Next one, if you were me, what would you do? Or if you were in my shoes, what would you do? And finally, what's your advice for me? Now let's move to expressions used for giving advice. So first one in the list is you should, and this is very common, or you'd better, why don't you, maybe you should, I advise you to, if I were you, I would, or you ought to. And this is really, strong advice. When you use the expression, you ought to. It's quite formal. And finally, it might be a good idea too. Right, time for some practice. So, in the following exercise, you're going to take a look at some pictures and try to give advice to those people using the expressions we have just studied. So what's your advice to the following people? Picture one. So basically we have a girl here with a swollen cheek, and she seems to be in a terrible pain. And here's what she says. I have a terrible toothache. What should I do? So what is your advice for her? Right. You should go to the dentist. You can say you should go to the dentist. Or you'd better go to the dentist. Why don't you go to the dentist? If I were you, I would go to the dentist. So you choose any expression you like from the table. Next situation. So I guess most of you is familiar with Mr. Simpson. He's got a problem with weight here. So he says, I feel I'm gaining weight these days. I don't know what to do. I'm too fat. So what is your advice for Mr. Simpson? Absolutely. If I were you, I would go on a diet and exercise regularly. Well, these are the most common pieces of advice that people get when they have weight issues. Exercise and diet. So same thing again here. So you can say, if I were you, I would go on a diet and exercise. Or you'd better go on a diet and exercise. Or you should go on a diet and exercise, and so on and so forth. All right. I guess you can easily identify with this guy here. So with the coronavirus lockdown, quarantine, most people feel bored these days, bored to death. I feel so bored these days. What's your advice for me? So what's your advice? Okay, so here you can say, why don't you find a new hobby? Or you'd better find a new hobby. All right? Just to entertain yourself and feel you're doing something, useful, instead of wasting time doing nothing. All right, poor baby. Oh, he's kind of confused. He doesn't know which cookie to eat, the one on the right or the one on the left. Okay? So he needs some advice. These cookies are so delicious. Right or left? What's your advice? You'd better stop eating cookies. They're bad for your health. Yeah, you've seen how fat he is. He's in serious trouble. Right, look at the two girls here. So you see, one of them is screaming. She looks really angry. And the other one is on her nerves, okay? And here's what she says. She's getting on my nerves. She's screaming all the time. What can I do? What's your advice for her? Maybe you should advise her to change her behavior and do some yoga. Yeah? That sounds like a good advice. And why don't you take up yoga yourself? Another picture, another situation. Insomnia. What a nightmare. I find it hard to sleep lately. I don't know what to do. So what's your advice for Tom? Okay, it might be a good idea to see a doctor. So you can't just eat anything or take sleeping pills on your own. You better see a doctor, okay? He's the best one to advise you. Okay, this is it with the situations. Now, conversation time. You're going to think about a situation and write a short dialogue where people ask for and give advice. So please make sure you send them to me on Messenger. All right? Thank you.